F. Scott Fitzgerald's novel is read in a lot of American high schools today. My high school wasn't one of those. I mean, the books we read in my high school were stuff like Catcher in the Rye, Walden, Siddhartha, Moby Dick, that Truman Capote novel that I can't remember the name of. Point being, I have not read The Great Gatsby. I haven't read the book, I haven't seen any of the other adaptations, both to film, television, etc. So I'm flying into this almost completely blind. What I mean by almost is because, well, this film is directed by Baz Luhrmann. I'm not a fan of Baz Luhrmann's work. I mean, one, he can create pretty interesting and good visuals, but his storytelling is really weak even when he's using pre-established material. I mean, this is the guy that thought Romeo and Juliet needed to be set in modern day with an MTV flair. Now, I know a lot of people say, oh, but he saved the movie musical genre. Yeah, well, people are still debating the quality of Moulin Rouge to this day. And I haven't seen the entirety of Moulin Rouge, but from what I've seen, yeah, good visuals, possibly good music, weak story. And so you have a book that scholars say is the great American novel that most people find boring. You hand it off to a director who can create interesting visuals, but is a fairly weak storyteller, at least in my opinion. And then you have it produced by Jay-Z, have it star Leonardo DiCaprio and Tobey Maguire, and it's just a case where it's just all up in the air from there. So going in this, it could have gone one way or another, and well, let's begin with this episode of Romney's Reviews. Now, the first thing I noticed was the use of anachronistic music. I mean, I know the novel and the story are supposed to be set in the 1920s, like the post-World War I years where things seem to be going really well for America prior to the huge stock market crash. This is kind of in that little heyday of the 20s. Yet, he uses modern-day hip-hop music. I mean, I thought the hip-hop music that they played in the trailers was just going to be played in the trailers, but nope, it's in the film, so at least he gets credit for using music that's actually featured in the film, but it didn't really help to set the mood of the story. It didn't really help to establish the tone. It was distracting. The second thing I noticed is that the script heavily relies on direct quotation. Now, I know there's a lot of key lines in the book. Again, I haven't read it, but I know there's a lot of key lines and a lot of key phrases that help convey a lot of the overarching themes of the story, but it's just a case where if I can tell that the actors are saying something that's directly from the book, it's just a case of, okay, you literally just did copy and paste. It doesn't really add anything. It didn't really feel like they were like the characters were actually saying it naturally. It felt like, hey, I am quoting a book. If I wanted a dramatized reading of The Great Gatsby, I'd go buy a dramatized audiobook, or I'd sit in on a 9th grade high school English class. Another thing I noticed is that the editing in this film, it's a mess. I mean, at the beginning, it's cut like a trailer, moving way too quickly through a bunch of the stuff. It doesn't really allow us any time to really have a scene and have it developed. It's just a case that it's trying to blow through a lot of this earlier stuff so quickly. I understand that when you're adapting a novel, things are gonna have to be cut, but if you're not gonna give the time to develop those scenes, don't have those scenes at all. It does slow down towards the latter parts of the film, but almost to the point where it slows down to the point where the scenes start to drag. The film just kind of starts really slowing down, and it basically gets really long, slow, and boring. There are only really two things that I can compliment the film on. One is the elaborate set design and the costumes. Baz Luhrmann is really good at set design and costumes. That's probably the kind of stuff he should really stick with because that's what he's best at. He's good at really establishing the setting. However, some of it is hampered by some of the shots and weird artistic editing choices where they have like the words on the screen and stuff, where he thinks he's being poetic and artistic when really it's just coming across as pretentious. The only other thing I can really compliment is that the actors do a really good job. I mean, granted, Leonardo DiCaprio's performance got a little annoying at times, but given how the story played out with Gatsby's character, the mannerisms and kind of the annoyingness and almost fakeness of it actually makes sense. I mean, I know some people haven't read the book, so I'm going to try to keep it spoiler-free, but those of you who read the book and know the story know what I'm talking about. weren't. And a lot of the other actors that were in it did a good job as well. I mean, I had trouble I didn't realize that Tom Buchanan was played by Joel Edgerton for the longest time. It's just like, that actor looks familiar, but I can't quite place it. And so yeah, the acting was one of the high points of the movie. The actors did a really good job. It's just a lot of the problems came from the screenplay and how it was written. Like I mentioned earlier, it relies a lot on direct quotation, which again, if I can tell that the actors are saying lines that are literally direct quotes from the book, it doesn't work for me. It doesn't feel like a natural delivery. And it's the same case with how the film almost has an argument with itself on whether or not to rely on Tobey Maguire's voiceover. Tobey Maguire, the actor playing Nick Calloway, I think it's Calloway. Basically, Tobey Maguire's character is the one narrating through most of it, but the film kind of struggles during it on whether or not to rely on the narration or not. Now, if it was almost entirely narrated by his character, it could have worked, because it was just a case of, okay, he's narrating a story. But it's kind of a case where partway through they kind of almost forget that, then suddenly try to bring it back in some cool artistic way that just doesn't look right. It's kind of a case of, you don't need to put the words on the screen. It's a film. Show, don't tell. That's the idea. So overall, this film's kind of I mean, it's got some good set design, it's got some good costume design, it has some creative shots, but where it loses me is the sloppy editing at the beginning and in the middle, where it is either really too fast or too slow. The use of the anachronistic music that almost clashes with the type of setting and tone they're trying to set, which, again, I can understand like having like more instrumentalized, like 20s-ish versions of those songs, but just having like the hip hop songs that we know it's modern day hip hop, it breaks the suspension of disbelief for me. And the third thing is that the delivery from the actors, when it came to like quoting the memorable lines, just didn't feel natural. I could tell that they were quoting the book. And well, that's a problem. They could have delivered the lines better to at least make it sound more natural, but it didn't sound natural. It was just a case of that the script relied too heavily on it. Again, I'm not as big of a purist. I understand like, oh, but it needs to be faithful to the book. Yeah, but if it's gonna affect an actor's delivery, rewording it is probably not gonna be that bad. If you're a fan of the book, you'll probably get some enjoyment out of it, because some of the people in the theater that had actually read the book said they liked it. But if you're someone like me, or who's just an average person who doesn't read a lot, I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, if you're looking for a film that's character-driven and really dialogue-heavy, there's a lot of other better films out there to sate that sort of interest, because this film just doesn't satisfy in that regard. That said, on my personal scale, I'm giving The Great Gatsby a 3 out of 5. So that's it for this week's episode of Romney's Reviews. As for next week, I'll be reviewing Star Trek Into Darkness. See ya then.